and y'all will all.
It's about to start. It's setting up.
Y'all will stop your video while I'm talking, right?
Okay. So now you can see 4 of us.
Yes.
And now I'm going to stop my video. Okay, so now it's just the 2 of you, and we see the 2 of you on YouTube.
Okay, great. So Jacob, you'll take take the video off till I finish, and then you'll come on.
What did you say, Anne?
Go live. You're live, and
okay.
You're live.
All right. Shalom and welcome, everyone. I am Ann Sampson, Director on the Board of Congregation Bina, and your host for this series. We are delighted with the great response we have received to this, the 3rd event in the Sephardic Mizrahi series. Alan Herman of the Canadian Institute for Jewish Research and I agreed several months ago that Congregation Bina and CIJR would jointly launch this series. Thank you very much, Alan, for all that you have done and continue to do in pulling this series together. We are proud and delighted to have this series supported by the following 7 Jewish organizations: the Canadian Institute for Jewish Research, Congregation Bina, Kulanu Canada, Beth Raim Synagogue, the Lodzer Center Congregation, Jews Against Anti-Semitism Canada, and Canadians for Israel's Legal Rights. Our heartfelt thanks to all our supporting organizations who work so hard on behalf of Israel and the Jewish community, both at home and around the world. Thank you to Ariella Daniels for designing the flyer, and to Fleur Sampson and Anil Schonberg for looking after the technical details for us this evening and throughout. There will be a question and answer session following the presentation. Please use the chat only for questions for the speaker. This evening's webinar will be 1 hour and 15 minutes long and is being recorded. The recording will be available on YouTube Live. It is now my honor and privilege to introduce our guest speaker, Jacob Steinberg. After graduating from university, Jacob Steinberg traveled around the world for 5 years. He climbed mountains, crossed deserts, explored jungles, and spent his last year traveling across Australia, where he learned first about the story that he will talk to us today. Later on, Jacob spent 3 decades as a project finance executive, financing infrastructure projects in Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, and Eastern Europe, where he met small and isolated Jewish communities. He got involved with Kulanu Canada, a nonprofit organization that supports such communities. Jacob is personally involved in supporting the Suriname Jewish community, the oldest existing Jewish community in the Americas. In 2016, he raised the funds to build a memorial monument for the 104 Surinamese Jews who died in the Holocaust. He was the vice president of Kulanu Canada and is the coordinator for the Suriname Jewish community. He is making every effort to help them reconnect to the worldwide Jewish community. Jacob is an avid sportsman who played for 14 years in the Ontario Australian Rules Football League. He loves traveling and is very interested in Jewish history. He lives in Toronto with his wife Norma and his 2 daughters, Ilana and Heather. I'm glad to say that Jacob is a good friend of Congregation Bina. Welcome, Jacob. It's all yours.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Special thanks to Anne from Bina Congregation and Alan from the Canadian Institute for Jewish Research for organizing the event, and to all our sponsors. When I told my friends 14 years ago that I'm going to work in Suriname, the most common response was, "Suri who?" One of my friends said to me, "Jacob, I'm afraid they're sending you to work in a place that doesn't exist." So let me start with some basic information about Suriname. Suriname is one of the smallest and least populated countries in South America. It is bounded by French-speaking French Guyana in the east, English-speaking Guyana in the west, and Portuguese-speaking Brazil in the south. Population is just over 600,000 people. The capital city is Paramaribo. Suriname is the most ethnically diverse country in South America and the Caribbean. The main ethnic groups are Hindustanis. They are originally from northern India. They came in the late 19th century to work in the plantations after slavery was abolished. The Maroons are descendants of escaped African slaves. Creoles are mixed of European and African ancestry. Javanese are from the island of Java in Indonesia, who also came to work in the plantations after slavery was abolished. Then we have mixed race, American Indians, Chinese, and white. The main religions in Suriname are Protestant, Hindu, Catholic, and Muslim. Most of the Muslim population are from the island of Java in Indonesia, and some of them are from India. The official language of Suriname is Dutch, and the spoken language is Sranan-Tongo. Sranan-Tongo is a mix of Dutch, Portuguese, African languages, English, Yiddish, and Hebrew. I'll give you a couple of examples. Bad food is treif, problems are tsures, and Hebrew words are collecting all the time, like sika, pina, tsarali, masa, etc. Paramaribo is also known as the Wooden City. It was placed on the UNESCO Heritage List in 2002, and there are a few hundred magnificent wooden colonial buildings in the city center. I want to give you a couple of examples. The first one is the St. Peter and Paul Cathedral. It was built in 1809 as the Jewish theater. It was bought in 1826 by the Catholic Church and constructed as a cathedral in 1885. The cathedral is the biggest wooden structure in the Western Hemisphere, and it's absolutely spectacular. The second building is our synagogue, Neve Shalom, and we will see a little bit later how it looks like inside. 90% of the country is covered by dense jungles and rivers. There are no roads to the interior. You rather use a small airplane or a dugout canoe through the river system. The country also has a very diverse wildlife with many rare species living in the wild. In 2009, when I was in Australia, I read an article about Suriname in the Australian newspaper. They called the country the last Eden. Now that you know that Suriname does exist, I just want to tell you that the presentation will be divided to four sections. The first one is the history of the Jewish community of Suriname. The second one is Suriname in World War II. The third one is Suriname after World War II. And the last section will be the Suriname Jewish community today. The segments that related to World War II era are very relevant, as today is Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Memorial Day in Israel, and the beginning of the Holocaust Education Week. 529 years ago, in 1492, following the Alhambra Decree, the Spanish Inquisition ordered the expulsion of the Jews who will not convert. So about 200,000 Spanish Jews were expelled. They were expelled to Portugal Portugal, Italy, Greece, the Balkans, Turkey, and North Africa. About 200,000 Jews who stayed in Spain had to convert, and they are known as conversos, moranos, or anusim in Hebrew. 4 years later, Portugal introduced its own version of the Inquisition. But expulsion wasn't an option for the Portuguese Jews. It was convert or die. 90 years later, in 1581, the 4 northern provinces of Holland declared independence from Spanish rule. One of the first things they did was they declared freedom of religion, which was a revolutionary concept at that time. As a result, in 1600, thousands of Portuguese and Spanish Jews moved to Amsterdam and established the Dutch Jewish community. They enjoyed freedom of religion, but they were not allowed to own land. Europe at that time was an agrarian society, so no land meant exclusion from wealth. But new opportunities in the New World attracted thousands of Portuguese Jews to the Dutch colonies where they were allowed to own land. Suriname was discovered by the Spanish, but was never settled. In 1639, first group of Portuguese and Spanish Jews arrived via Dutch Brazil. The capital of Dutch Brazil was at that time Recife in northern Brazil. They settled in a place called Torarica. They cleared the jungle and started sugar plantations. Later on, Torarica became the first capital of Suriname. It is interesting that in Portuguese and Spanish, Torarica means Torah Rica, our rich Torah. So this is the first and the last capital city in the world that I know that was named after our rich Torah. 12 years later, in 1651, after 2 failed attempts, the British colonized Suriname. The 2 failed attempts were because they didn't get along with the American Indians. Sir Francis Willoughby founded a permanent British colony. The British settlers came mainly from Barbados, and they lived together with the Jews in Torarica. A year later, a second group of Portuguese Jews arrived, and they settled nearby in a place called Cassipora Creek. And in 1665, a third group that came from Amsterdam joined the group in Cassipora Creek. The Jews were not allowed to live in England at that time. It was a British policy, however, to encourage as many settlers as possible in the new colony. In 1665, an Anglo-Dutch war started in European waters. 5 months after the outbreak of the war, the British granted special privileges to the Jews. Why? So they will not leave. Since the Jews were the backbone of the economy, Jews knew how to successfully run plantations, and they had excellent relationships with the American Indians. Special privileges included freedom of religion, freedom to have their own Jewish schools, freedom to own land, freedom to own their own court of justice. That means that the Jews now had self-rule. They were not under the British rule. Freedom to have their own army, the civil guard. These rights made the Jews of Suriname the only diaspora community to achieve complete political autonomy before the founding of the State of Israel. In 1667, a peace agreement known as the Second Breda Treaty was signed, and in Article 3 of the agreement, there was kind of a swap of land. Suriname was given to the Dutch and New Amsterdam to the British. New Amsterdam is known today as New York City. So in retrospect, you might think that it was the worst real estate transaction ever. But for the Dutch, it was the deal of the century. Why? Because of the importance of sugar. Sugar was the most valuable commodity at the time, better than gold. There were 100 ships sailing between Suriname and Holland carrying sugarcane that was processed by thousands of small factories that employed tens of thousands of people. Then the Dutch traders sold the sugar all over Europe. So all involved in the supply chain of sugar became very rich. So after 15 years of British colonial rule, the colony changed hands. In 1667, the Dutch feared the Jews will live with the English, so they kept the special privileges. And in addition, in 1669, the Dutch granted the right to establish a Jewish colony known as the Joden Savannah in Dutch, or the Jewish Savannah. So with all those rights, the Jews felt that here, in the middle of the jungle, they found their own promised land. They called it Jerusalem on the riverside. Here, in the middle of the Amazon jungle, they started to build their own Jerusalem. You visit today the Joden Savannah, you see this sign that says, "Welcome to the Joden Savannah," the former residence of the Portuguese Jewish nation, also known as Jerusalem on the riverside. The Jews thrived in the Jewish Savannah. If in Tararica they lived together with the British, here it was the only place in the world that Jews lived in their own town and governed their own town. In 1685, they built a brick synagogue called Bracha v'Shalom, a blessing and peace, and the town became the center of Jewish life. They used to have the synagogue, the court of justice, the school, and the communal authorities. Their numbers grew very fast. In 1694, there were 575 Jews that owned 40 plantations. 43 years later, there are 2,000 Jews, of whom 800 owned 115 plantations out of the 400 in the country. Europe at that time was very religious in the 16th, 17th century. So were the Jews. According to the special privileges, plantation owners could be only Sephardic Jews. Because they were so religious, the plantation owners gave the plantations biblical names, such as Carmel, Beit El, Hebron, Beersheba, Machanaim, Sukkot, Gilgal, Goshen, etc., etc. On Shabbat and holidays, the Jews from the plantations used to come to celebrate and socialize in the Joden Savannah. The historian Robert Cohen, in his book Jews in Another Environment, wrote that the most important Jewish center in the Western Hemisphere during the 18th century was the great colony Suriname. There, Jews formed perhaps the most privileged Jewish community in the world. To give you a perspective, the Jews in Jamaica and Barbados, which was very important British colonies, obtained equal rights, not special privileges, just equal rights, only in the 19th century, almost 200 years after the Jews of Suriname. So the Jews were very successful and very rich, but they were also very generous. I'll give you an example. She'erit Israel is the oldest Jewish congregation in the United States. It was established in 1654. After Portugal invaded Dutch Brazil, the community was not allowed by the authorities to build a synagogue. Only 75 years later, in 1729, they got the permission to build a synagogue. But the community was small and poor. So they appealed for money from the Sephardic and Portuguese Jewish communities around the world. The Portuguese Jewish community in Suriname sent them the money. Until today, on Yom Kippur, after Kol Nidrei prayer, there is a special blessing in She'erit Israel Synagogue in New York for the Bracha v'Shalom Synagogue and the Jewish Savannah that helped them to build their synagogue. Not like the Dutch settlers that came to make money and go back to Holland, the Jews came to stay. So for 100 years, the Jewish Savannah was a flourishing community. The success attracted hundreds of Ashkenazi Jews to Suriname, but they were not allowed to own land. So they became petty traders and merchants in the new capital, Paramaribo. Nothing is forever. Between 1765 and 1795, social, political, and financial changes caused the collapse of Suriname's sugar plantation-based economy. It was the perfect storm. From 115 plantations in 1737, 50 years later, there are only 46 Jewish plantations left, mainly lumber and coffee, no more sugar plantations. From being very rich, in no time, 2/3 of the community was pulled down to poverty. The Jews moved to the new capital, Paramaribo, and the Jewish savannah continued to be the rabbinical and spiritual center where 22 families, about 100 people lived there. They were mostly elderly and impoverished. The Jews used to return to the Jordan savannah to celebrate the holidays until September 1832. A big fire reduced the building to ashes. Within a few years, the jungle overgrew the remains of the Jordan savannah. Since most of the Jews moved to the new capital, Paramaribo, in April 1825, their special privileges were terminated by the Dutch crown. The Jews lost everything. They worked in trade and as professionals, and the Jewish population started to decline and declined fast. From its peak in 1737, where 2,000 Jews lived in Suriname, in 1937, there were only 790 Jews left. In 1975, when Suriname gained its independence from Holland, their number was down to 500 people and continued to decline. Many Jews arrived in the late 17th century and settled in the new capital, Paramaribo. Ashkenazi Jews spoke Dutch and Yiddish among themselves, while the Sephardic Jews spoke Portuguese until 1837. So between 1690 until 1716, the two communities prayed together. But in 1716, the Sephardic Jews, who saw themselves superior to the Ashkenazi Jews, they enjoyed the special privileges and they were the wealthy ones, they decided to split and build their own synagogue. In 1734, the division between the two communities were formalized, and the Sephardic built their own synagogue, Tzedek v'Shalom, or Justice and Peace. What is interesting is that after the split, the Ashkenazi community continued to worship according to the Sephardic rite, surviving until today. Only after the collapse of the sugar plantations in 1789, the two communities started to work together again. Tiny Suriname was the world's major supplier of bauxite. Bauxite is the primary ore of aluminum. After the outbreak of World War II, on September 1st, 1939, the United States could not afford losing its major supplier of bauxite. Without aluminum, aircraft and shipbuilding production could have been stopped. First alarming signs of things to come happened on May 10, 1940. Same day that neutral Holland was invaded by the German forces. A German cargo ship called the Goslar was sank in the middle of the Suriname River by its captain in an attempt to block the bauxite flow from Suriname. This is the Goslar, and that's how it looked like when it sank. And the bottom picture is as it looked like today. Its neighboring from the east, French Guiana, was now controlled by the pro-Vichy government. They could cross the Maravane River, which is the border between the two countries, and within an hour, they could have occupied and destroyed the unprotected mines in eastern Suriname. In addition, thousands of German immigrants sympathetic to the Nazis were in Brazil and other neighboring countries. So the threat was real. As a result, on September 1st, 1941, President Roosevelt offered Queen Wilhelmina, the exiled Queen of Holland, to station 3,000 infantry and anti-aircraft personnel in order to protect Suriname. That was 3 months before the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. The lack of basic infrastructure in Suriname required that the Americans will invest heavily in building, among others, airfield, roads, and military barracks. So tiny Suriname, with less than 200,000 people, enjoyed economic boom that lasted the whole war period. The famous Surinamese historian and writer, Cynthia McLeod, told me a few years ago that if you ask any Surinamese, what do you think about World War II? The answer would have been, those were our best days ever. President Roosevelt initiated the Evian Conference in France on July 1938 to discuss the refugee problem created by Jews fleeing persecution from Nazi Germany. The conference was attended by 32 countries, but the conference was ultimately doomed. 32 participants failed to come to any agreement about accepting Jewish refugees fleeing the Third Reich. After the conference, Hitler stood up on stage and said, well, obviously, if no one cares about the Jews, why should I? Only one country agreed to accept 100,000 refugees. It was a small and impoverished country with a population of only 1.6 million people, the Dominican Republic. They issued 5,000 visas immediately after the conference, but the vast majority of the recipients didn't reach the Dominican Republic. Why? First, it was hard to get out of occupied Europe at that time. Second, there were no direct ship lines going from Europe to the Dominican Republic. And third, President Roosevelt undermined the plan, as he feared that the Dominican Republic is too close to the USA, and many of the refugees will most probably would come to America. All in all, about 1,000 German Jews managed to arrive before the gates were closed. There are 3 other countries in the region that were, one way or another, safe haven for Jews fleeing Europe. The first one was Jamaica. The British built a camp called Camp Gibraltar. It was designed to host 7,000 British subjects who live in Gibraltar. But since only 1,500 people moved to Jamaica, so in December 1941, the British government, the Polish government in exile, and the American Jewish distribution agreed to send Polish and Dutch Jews that were at that time in Lisbon, Portugal. Lisbon became the refugees capital of Europe at that time, to Jamaica. The refugees who came were not allowed to work and were not allowed to seek citizenship. In its height, there are about 1,400 Jewish refugees in Camp Gibraltar. The second country was Trinidad. In 1938, 200 Jewish refugees who left Hamburg, Germany, arrived to Port of Spain. They took advantage of a loophole in the Immigration Act, which required no visa to enter Trinidad. You just have to deposit 50 pounds sterling, which was refunded after 1 year. But when the British governor heard the 2,000 German Jews are ready to leave to Trinidad, he changed the immigration regulation. In all, 585 refugees admitted to Trinidad. They were allowed to live freely, to work wherever they want. There were no restrictions on them, and they were known as the Calypso Jews. The last country that accepted Jews, no question asked, was Suriname. Hundreds of Jewish refugees settled in Suriname during the late 1930s and early 1940s. Among them were the first group of refugees who came. They came in 1938. It was the entire Sephardic Jewish community of Hamburg, Germany. And the last refugees that arrived was on Christmas Eve in 1942. 123 refugees, including 73 Dutch Jews, arrived on board of the Nyassa. Nyassa was a Portuguese ship that left Lisbon, Portugal. The local Surinamese parliament and the local population did their best to help the refugees. They provided the refugees with small homes that was built especially for them. And they immediately could get jobs in the booming economy of Suriname. I always ask myself, what could have happened if the fate of the passenger of the St. Louis, if the captain chose to sail from Cuba to the neighboring Dominican Republic of Suriname instead of going to the United States or Canada? In my opinion, all of them would have survived because they would get a political asylum, no question asked. We'll go to the period of after World War II. At the end of the war, there were between 7 to 11 million displaced persons, or DPs, in camps scattered in Germany, Austria, and Italy. Among them, there were 250,000 Jews, Holocaust survivors. Most of them were about 175,000 in a DP camps in Germany. With the British restrictions for immigration to Palestine and the slow acceptance of Jewish refugees in Western countries, for example, only in 1948, which was 3 years after the end of the war, only then 80,000 Jews from DP camps were authorized by the Americans to come as immigrants to the United States. In Canada, in 1945, there was a discussion about how many Jewish refugees should be allowed to enter Canada after the war. An anonymous Canadian government bureaucrat offered the now infamous reply, none is too many. So while the Jewish refugees were sitting for years after the end of the war in DP camps, the Freeland League, which was an anti-Zionist organization, came up with a plan called the Saramacca Plan, to settle 30,000 Jewish refugees that sitting in DP camps in the district of Saramacca. Most people never heard about Saramacca. Saramacca is a district in Suriname. In 1946, there were only a couple of thousand people living in Saramacca. The district was isolated. There were no roads in the jungle, and there was no bridge over the Saramacca River that could connect it with the capital Paramaribo, which is only 50 kilometers away. Even today, there are only about 17,500 people living in Saramacca. So in 1946, the League met with high-ranking Dutch officials to discuss the idea of resettling 30,000 Jewish refugees in Saramacca. In February 1947, the League was informed that the local Surinamese parliament had no objection for the proposed Jewish settlement. Remember, the Jews were the founders of the country, and they were very well respected by the locals. So in April 1947, a delegation was sent to Saramacca to study the land and to develop a plan for the resettlement. The League also secured what is equivalent to today $475 million from American donors. That was to fund the plan and to make sure that the host country Suriname will not have any cost. Soon after, the Surinamese government signed an agreement providing the 30,000 Jewish settlers the right for autonomy. As news broke, the Jews in a DP camp in Austria, in Vienna, announced their eagerness to move to Saramacca. So the League worked so hard in starting to implement the plan. But on May 14, 1948, the State of Israel was established. And after severe pressure from the Dutch government, which was the colonial power, on the Surinamese parliament caved in to the pressure and informed the Freeland League that negotiations are now suspended because the Jews have their own land, their own Israel, and they can go there. A few years ago, I was talking to the president of the Jewish community in Suriname, Shul Dong. He lives in Saramacca himself. And we talked about what happened if 30,000 Jews came to Saramacca. And Shul said to me, you know, Jacob, even if 90% of them were emigrating after that to other countries, still, we would have had today in Suriname a thriving Jewish community with thousands of people. So let's see how the Suriname Jewish community lives today. As the numbers continue to decline, in 1999, the two congregations, the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic, were merged. The community also changed from Orthodox to liberal, so everyone will feel welcome. The community today is isolated. It's isolated both geographically and linguistically. Geographically, it is difficult to come to Suriname. There is very few flights coming to Suriname. And linguistically, South America is predominantly Spanish-speaking continent. And it's hard to keep in touch with communities. They speak Spanish and we speak Dutch. In 1999, the two communities decided that they will use the Neve Shalom synagogue as the active synagogue. The old Sephardic synagogue, Tzedek v'Shalom, was closed down and the content was moved to the replica that was built in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. That's how it is look like today. If you come to the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, you see this replica. All the content, their own Kodesh, the bima, the furniture, the chandeliers, everything is from the original synagogue in Suriname. It's really beautiful. This is the current synagogue. It was built in 1719 and was rebuilt in 1835. That's how the community, the synagogue looks inside. It is really spectacular. And if you can see, it's hard to change old habits because the synagogue was so many years, or hundreds of years, Orthodox. Even they became liberal, you can see that the women are on the right side and the men are on the left side. This is how the synagogue looks inside. It is one of the last 4 Portuguese synagogues in the world with sandy floors. The other 3 are in Jamaica, Curaçao, and St. Thomas. Let me show you a couple of pictures to show you how Jewish life is today in the community. At the top right is Kabbalat Shabbat. Every Friday after the service, the community joined together in the small community hall that attached to the synagogue for Kiddush and community dinner. Normally they serve for dinner pom. Pom is a traditional Portuguese Jewish dish, which is kind of a baked chicken with lemon and potatoes. And it became the national dish of Suriname. On the top left, you see Purim. That's a Purim spiel. Below that, it's Hanukkah. And on the right, it is the community Seder. Every year, the community made a community, they celebrate Passover together. And there are about 200 to 250 people attending because about 100 to 150 guests are always asked to join us. They are locals. They just respect the Jewish community and want to celebrate with us Passover. So in 2019, when I was there, I took a couple of pictures. This is Rosh Hashanah in the synagogue, and that was Simchat Torah. So you get a flavor of how Jewish life is today, but it is not easy life for the community. There are many challenges, and I'll focus only on 3 of them. The first one is demographics. The community is small. They have only 101 members today. They are aging. The community lost 11 members in the last 2 years, and there is immigration. If in the past there was a flow between Holland and Suriname, people came from Holland for a couple of years and Surinamese went to Holland. Today, it is a flow in one way only, out of the country, out of Suriname. We lost 24 young members lately. Some of them went to study overseas and didn't come back. Others were offered the job offers in other countries and they couldn't resist and moved forward. Some made aliyah to Israel. And, you know, the young ones with such small numbers and no people coming to the country, it is hard to find Jewish partners. So many of them are assimilating. The second challenge is religious leadership. The community didn't have a rabbi for over 60 years. It's just impossible to have a full-time rabbi in such a small community. And the third challenge is financial. The community has 2 synagogues, 3 cemeteries, and many assets to maintain. The synagogues are old buildings and they're expensive to maintain. Also, the country is very poor. 70% of the population of Suriname live below poverty line. The average salary in Suriname is between $350 to $400 a month. The country is in economic crisis for quite some time, and as the inflation rate is more than 50% per year. And as a result, there are restrictions on foreign exchange. You cannot buy US dollars or euros. In Canada or the US, if I need to buy, say, challah for Shabbat, or matzot for Passover, or kosher wine, or candles, whatever, I just go to the next door supermarket and buy whatever I need. In Suriname, everything has to be imported. So it's very expensive, and with the foreign exchange controls, it is very difficult to finance it. For example, last week, Seder, they had to import the matzot and kosher wine from Miami. How do you pay if you cannot get US dollars? So what do we do in order to solve the problems? On the demographic side, the community has now 22 people who are going through conversion classes. They are run by Rabbi Mennoten Brink from Amsterdam. He used to come before COVID-19 every month for about 10 days and gave intensive classes. But because of the COVID-19, it now disrupted and the community is moving it into Zoom classes. Now you may ask yourself, who are those people who want to become Jewish in the middle of nowhere? Well, some are married to Jewish partners. Their ancestors were Jewish. They have a say in Suriname that if you shake your family tree, few Jews will fall. So those are some of the fallen Jews from local family trees. And there is a group of local people who wanted to be Jewish. They come to services for years, they participate in all the events, and now they have the opportunity to make it happen. So we're very excited and hope that they will bring new energy to the community. On the religious leadership, for the high holidays, we have 2 friends that are coming from New York City, and the Surinamese guy who lives in Aruba. They're all Torah readers, and they come to help our 2 local Torah readers to run the high holiday services, and it works very, very well. It's wonderful. And on the financial side, I have to tell you that this community is doing miracles. They are doing an amazing job in maximizing the revenues from the assets that they have. They cover almost all the operating expenses of the community, and it's an absolutely remarkable achievement, in my opinion. But what about special projects? Or what about, say, paying for importing products for Pesach? How do you do that? So the answer is high membership. 14 years ago, after 2 weeks in Suriname, I thought that I'm not coming back to Suriname, and I didn't know that I will be coming for the next 2.5 years back and forth. But I was very touched by the hospitality of the community to me. It was such a wonderful experience that on my way home, I was thinking, I have to do something to help them, but I had no idea what to do. While I'm flying, an idea came to me. It was close to the high holidays, and I knew that it's time to renew the membership in our synagogues. And traditionally, lots of my friends, when they get the letter to renew the membership, they start to complain how expensive it is. So I said, this is an opportunity. What I did, I said, I will tell them, I'll show you a couple of beautiful pictures of a synagogue in Suriname. I showed them the pictures and I said, you know what? Here's your plan B. For $18, you can become a member in this beautiful synagogue. For $180, you become a lifetime member. And you have all the rights like anybody else in the synagogue. You can come to services, you can have bat mitzvah or bar mitzvah to your kids. You can get married if you really want, even come back and get married there. The only problem is if you want to come to a service, you have to fly and it will cost you about $1,000. But the message was understood. I explained to them that the high membership, it's basically a tax-deductible donation. No one will contact you after a year or send you an email and say, please renew your membership. The objective of the high membership is to support special projects that will help the community to continue to live meaningful Jewish life and to thrive. So today we have more than 120 high members from all over the world, from Australia to Europe, to Israel, to Canada, to United States, to Trinidad, etc. We publish for the high members twice a year newsletter, which connect them with the community, what they're doing, how things are going there, with lots of beautiful pictures. In that way, that the money that were donated, we can play for the suppliers. For example, for the Seder, the supplier of the matzot and kosher wine is in Miami. So I paid him in US dollars for the high members' money, and the community paid in Surinamese dollars for the transportation to Suriname, which is the majority of the cost, and it became a win-win formula. So let me share with you just a couple of projects that we did that, in my opinion, can demonstrate how few Canadian dollars or US dollars can go so far in a country like Suriname. In 2015, I visited Suriname and met with the community leadership. I asked them, is there any project that you always wanted to do, but you couldn't afford? They said to me that for decades, they wanted to build a memorial monument for the Surinamese Jews who died in the Holocaust, but it was too expensive. Well, I said to them, what are you talking about? You are in South America. The Holocaust was in Europe. But they said to me, Jacob, Suriname was a very small country at the time, less than 200,000 people. So they said, if you wanted to go, there was no university. If you wanted to go to higher education, you had to go to Holland. If you were a business person, your business partners were in Holland. If you were a professional, a doctor or a dentist, and you wanted to expand your skills, you had to go to Holland. And many people had families in Holland, so there was back and forth going to visit families or working for a couple of years and coming back. Those people were in the wrong place at the wrong time when World War II started. They ended up just like all the Dutch Jews in the death camps. So I asked them how many of them were there. They said, we over the years made a list and we came to about 80 names. But they said, there are many more that we don't know who they are because they were murdered with the whole entire family. They said to me, Jacob, it is 70 years since the end of World War II. Either we do it now or never. Could you help us? Now, how could I say no? I agreed, didn't know what I'm getting into. Well, we faced basically two challenges. The first one, it's the obvious one, the financial ones. The second one is how do you come with complete and accurate list of all the names that died more than 70 years ago in Europe? It was like mission impossible, but miracle happens sometimes. When we communicated with the director of Hall of Names in Yad Vashem, this is the central database of Yad Vashem for all the names of the victims in the Holocaust. They have access to all the databases anywhere in the world. So they're the authority in the world for the list of victims of the Holocaust. So when we exchanged notes with Dr. Alex Avram, the director of the Hall of Names, we gave him the 80 names that we had. They came from all their database with 24 names that we didn't have. And we provided them more than 30 names that they didn't have in any database. So after going back and forth of the lists, we agreed that now the 104 names is the most complete and accurate list that we can come. And think about it, 104 victims in a small community like that. It was 18% of the Surinamese Jewish community at the time. It's a huge loss for the community. So with the help of some amazing people, some of them never heard about Suriname, and about 60 high members, we raised the money at no time. What they couldn't do for 70 years, we did it in less than 6 months. On March 2016, we unveiled the memorial monument. The ceremony was attended by all the ambassadors of the major powers that participated in World War II, all the religious leaders in Suriname, government officials, war veterans, and some Holocaust survivors. It was a very touching ceremony. I want to share with you only one thing to explain about this monument. Many of the 600 tombstones in the Jewish Savannah, this is the picture of the cemetery in the Jewish Savannah, and Kasipora Creek, the tombstone there dated from 1666. Most of them have beautiful symbols engraved on them. The symbol can tell, in many cases, who the person was. For example, the one on the left is a Kohen. The person on the right was a Levi. Why? Because he's pouring water on the hands of a Kohen. But a very common symbol, there was a tree fallen by the angel of death or the hand of God. These symbols refers to early death or life that ended before its time. The architect of our monument decided to use the same symbol that their ancestors used for hundreds of years in our monument. The victims, he said, all of them died before their time. So as you can see at the top right in the monument, this is the motif of the fallen trees. That's how the three other sides of the monuments look like. It has the name, the family name, date of birth, date of death, and the camp that they murdered. If in Europe, most of the Jews who died in the Holocaust were Ashkenazi Jews, in Suriname, more than 60% were Portuguese Jews. If you look at the names on the wall, you can see Bueno Bibas, Mopurgo, Bueno de Mosquita, Belmonte, Fernandez, de Granada, De La Parra, Pinto, Da Silva, etc., etc., etc. It's all Portuguese names. For the statistics, 53% of the Surinamese Jews died in Auschwitz and 20% in Sobibor. And this is almost exactly as the statistics of the Dutch Jews who were murdered in the Holocaust. So 75 years after the end of World War II, the 104 Surinamese Jews who were killed in the Holocaust are now all remembered. Previously, many were forgotten and some were erased from history altogether. Now, every year, on Yom HaShoah, which is starting tonight, the community gathers in front of the monument for a memorial ceremony. We read the names, say the prayers, and we put flowers in their memory. The last thing I want to share with you is that in the last 3 years, we realized that from the visitors that are coming to see the monument, more than 30% ask us a question: what is the Holocaust? It doesn't matter where they come from, Suriname or from Holland or from America, the same question. So we decided to put a marker in Dutch and in English that explain what the Holocaust is. And as you can see here, on the left, this is the marker that we unveiled last year in the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. The four gentlemen that you see on the right are the last four Surinamese soldiers who fought in World War II. All of them are in the late 90s. They are very, very good friends of the community, and we honor them to unveil the marker. Let me go through very quickly through 2 or 3 projects that for me was very important, and for the community as well, to explain to you what can we do with small amount of money to help the community. There are 3 cemeteries in Paramaribo. One is the old Ashkenazi that is closed, is full. And the other 2 are the current Sephardic and Ashkenazi cemeteries. They were not fenced. So for so many years, it became the dumping ground of the city of Paramaribo. The place turned into a jungle. The place was horrific. And the community decided that enough is enough. It cannot continue like that. We have to do something. But in order to make sure that will not happen again and again, we had to fence the cemetery. First, we cleared the jungle. As you can see in the pictures, this is the cemetery. After that, from each cemetery, there are tens of trucks left full of junk, construction materials, anything and everything that you can think of. Once everything was cleared, we built a metal fence along the 4 sides of each cemetery. It's very long fence, but it stopped anyone to enter the place or to dump anything. Every 3 weeks, we cut the grass. The place looks beautiful, tidy, clean. And Suriname has many ethnic communities, and each of them have their own cemeteries. But if you drive in the streets of Paramaribo, when you arrive near the Jewish cemeteries, you say, wow, look how beautiful, how clean, and how tidy it is, very respectful. And we are very proud of it. That was not happened without the help of the high membership, the Surinamese community, and local contractors that gave us the material at cost. This is our mikvah. You will not find this type of mikvah anywhere in the world anymore. The pipes of the mikvah, it's almost 200 years old, were broken. There was lots of problems. So the high members and the community picked up the challenge. We fixed it, paid as much as it cost, and in the last 12 years, it's working beautifully. If you come to Suriname, you are most than welcome to go to the mikvah. In 2020, one of the problems of living in the Amazon basin is termites. So in early 2020, we noticed that our synagogue, the attached office and the community center, which are all wooden structures, they're a few hundred years old each, were under massive attack of termites. They could devastate the building structures. It was shocking. So thank God to Dalael, and thanks to the high members, they donated immediately. We treated the building with no time to ensure that all the buildings will be in very good shape for many years to come. And the last thing I want to show you, and I finish here, it is in 2019, I was asked to come with 2 friends of mine, one from the United States and one from Denmark, to make a survey of the the Sephardic and the Ashkenazi cemeteries to find out how many graves are unmarked. It's strange, but we spent almost a month. Luckily, we had books of all those years that people were buried there, and we came with almost 600 names of graves with no names. We decided that every person must have a name. So we decided to have, as you see in the left side, a simple solution, a small cement post with aluminum plaque, which tells the name, the family name, date of birth, and date of death. That's it. But it will never rust, and it will not be, the cement will never get killed by termites and disintegrate. So that's what we are doing now. We hope that in a couple of years, we will make sure that every person has a name in the cemeteries. I'd like to finish here. First of all, I'd like to thank you very much for joining me today. I hope that some of you will join to become Chai members, and those of you who are Chai members, thank you so much. I also hope that once travel will resume, some of you will come to visit us in the last Eden. Suriname is one of the most unique and beautiful countries that I know. And you will meet the oldest existing Jewish community in the Americas that against all odds continue to live meaningful Jewish life in the Amazon Basin. Last thing, I would like to thank Fleur and Anil from Bina Congregation for the technical support, because without them, we couldn't have done anything. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'll be more than glad to answer.
Thank you, Jacob, for your most informative and heartfelt presentation. We will now proceed with the question and answer session. We have received some questions and I will read them to you.
Okay.
The first one is, what is the origin of the word Suriname and what does it mean?
And what is the
Origin of the word Suriname. And
I don't know.
What does it mean? Do you know?
It doesn't mean
anything?
A name. Yeah.
Oh,
it used to be called Dutch Guyana when the Dutch were the colonial power. But I speak a little bit of Sranan Tongo, but I don't know what Suriname means.
Okay. Another question was, Renee said it was a fascinating and inspirational talk, very informative. But one question, why is Chabad not involved? Chabad usually achieves so much in fostering projects and getting young couples established everywhere. Why is Chabad not involved in Suriname?
For a very simple reason, they cannot make money. It's very rude answer, but I want to tell you one thing. Chabad send people almost every year to scout around how many people are still around, head count. They never offered anything to the community. And for me, the break was when in the neighboring country, Guyana, what used to be British Guyana, there was only one family, Jewish family, the Adas family. And the lady, the mother passed away. So there's no Jewish community, there's no synagogue, there's no cemetery. Where do you bury her? We used to send them every Passover, matzot and kosher wine to feel comfortable, that they are not isolated completely. But when she passed away, we started to think, we're going to bury her. So we called Chabad in Venezuela. This is the biggest community close to us. And the rabbi in Chabad said to us, oh, it's too expensive to help you guys. So what we can do for you, we can have 500 rabbis all over the world saying Kaddish for her. And I said to her, we need to bury her. We don't need your 500 rabbis saying Kaddish. What are you going to do? And they say, we cannot do anything for you. So the community called immediately, the Suriname community called immediately the board of directors. We are not rich community, but we hired an airplane, a small airplane that carried the body to Trinidad and from Trinidad to Suriname, and she was buried in Suriname at our expense. For me, it was the real face when you come to push come to shove, where are they coming, if they are really care or not. They're still coming, but I don't think there will be wedding. Also, we are now not an Orthodox community. We are a liberal community and they are Orthodox. So make your own judgment.
Okay, well, I'm surprised to hear that, because they are all over the world.
They are, and they are in Suriname, but they're not helping.
But not helping. Okay, here's something else. Why are there so many unmarked graves?
That's a very good question. So it's going back to history. There are three groups in the community. There are the small group of rich people. They could have graves from marble, and they have beautiful, beautiful graves there. The middle class had ordinary stone as the tombstone. And the poor they didn't have money to have a stone, so they made a marker from wood. As you saw in the picture there was two markers. That's a wooden marker. They hope that one day they'll save money and they will make a real tombstone. Over the years, the wooden tombstones were, because of the harsh weather in the Amazon, and the help of the termites, of course, they were disintegrated. So they disappeared. Many of the stones, when there was no fence, they were vandalized. People just broke stones, took it away. And some of them are just because of the harsh weather. After 100, 150 years, it's hard to read what it is, what's the name, nothing. It's so difficult to read it. So that's the reason that vandalism, harsh weather, and the wooden markers that disintegrated, all together comes to close to 600 graves without marker today.
Right. Okay. Do the Jews of Suriname suffer from anti-Semitism today?
No, not at all. Suriname the Jews were always welcomed by anyone and everyone. Every ethnic group, Suriname is a unique country. All the ethnic groups living in harmony. That's why you saw like almost 15% of the population is mixed race. They're all getting married with each other. Give you an example. Next to the synagogue, the Muslims built the biggest mosque in Suriname. Not that they are Ahmadiyya, which is more of a sect that is a pacifist sect. They don't believe in jihad and stuff like that. And they themselves they are slaughtered in Pakistan. So they came to Suriname, a big group of them as refugees. And they very peaceful, very good people. We are very good friends. So we don't suffer from anti-Semitism by anyone. On the contrary, the Christians love us. They're coming to participate in services. The Catholic bishop is a good friend of us. The Hindus are very good friends. So there's no anti-Semitism whatsoever. The Jews are not involved in politics. So we are part of the community, and there's no issues whatsoever, no discrimination and no anti-Semitism. But we do live on guard. The synagogue is fenced and protected 24 hours a day, just for precaution, because a couple of years ago, they stopped a group of ISIS terrorists who came to Suriname. They wanted to attack the American embassy. Luckily, they were caught. So we realized that, you better be safe than sorry, but in a daily life, there's no discrimination and no anti-Semitism.
Okay, there is a question here, Jacob. I don't quite get it, but I'll read it to you. You indicated there are 2 synagogues and 3 cemeteries. What 2 synagogues are there in Suriname today? Are they Sephardic and Ashkenazi, or conservative and reform?
Okay, as I said, in 1999, the communities merged. So they closed the Sephardic one, and the Sephardic one, all the contents moved to Israel, to the Israel Museum. As I said also at the beginning, after the split in the 18th century, the Ashkenazi continue to practice and to pray according to the Sephardic rite. So the continuation is until today. We continue to pray in Sephardic Nusach. So we consider ourselves, the community was called until 2 years ago in Dutch, the Portuguese Joodse gemeente, the Portuguese Jewish community. So we consider ourselves Sephardic or Portuguese Jewish community.
Portuguese, yeah.
And as I said again, the Ashkenazis are already, they don't know Ashkenazi Nusach because since they're born or the grandparents were born, they were praying even in their synagogue according to the Sephardi Nusach. So we are Sephardi. We are 100% Sephardi.
Sephardi. Are their kids ever involved in the birthright program?
Yeah, there was amazing opportunity in 2010 when we moved the contents to the Israel Museum of the Sephardic Synagogue. We wanted something in return, and they thought to play us hardball and to give us nothing, basically. And the community tried to negotiate with them, and it was just not on the same league. They have all the lawyers and et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, the president and the vice president of the community came to Israel in the last effort to try to negotiate. It's expensive to come to Israel, but they did it.
Yeah.
And so fortunately, there are two husband and wife, that they are both lawyers and they are both high members in the community. They were visiting Israel. They are members, Jonathan and Orly, they are members in Beit Reim.
Mm-hmm.
And I told them, Jonathan and Orly, would you mind to help in the negotiations? And they say, absolutely. They they went to Jerusalem with the president and the vice president and sat in the negotiations. And that was a game changer. When the president and the board of directors saw them, they start to talk business now. And one of the deals that we made was that the youngsters of the community will come to a special trip, birthright trip, only for the 16 kids of the community. They didn't mix them with any other group or anything. And thanks to Jonathan and Orly, I wish they would join us in this Theak and thinking. It was a remarkable trip for the kids. And very interestingly enough, the day they was visiting in Jerusalem, they came to the Israel Museum. And just by chance, that day, there was the opening of the replica of the synagogue. And they managed to be there. And it was so emotional for them because their parents and grandparents had the bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, you know, they got married there. It was very emotional visit there. They're crying like children, you know. And it was a closing circle. The birthright was amazing success. The kids were connected to Israel. One of them made Aliyah and joined the Israeli army after that. So I think it was a fantastic opportunity that, it will never happen again, but we're glad we had it.
Oh, I'm great. I'm so glad they got to go.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
And one more thing, you know, thank also to Kulanu organization in the United States that donated $10,000 so the community, the kids could fly to Miami because the trip was covered from Miami to Israel. So they helped them. The kids worked for a year trying to save money and they bridged the gap. And that was amazing. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. It's so wonderful when communities work together like that. And
Indeed.
together. The last question. Are any of them descendants of the slaves of the plantations?
Any descendants?
In that community, the Suriname,
Absolutely.
the Jewish community, are they descendants?
This is a very good question, and I'm so glad that you ask. You know, because when we talk slavery, it's not easy discussion, but there are two things. You know, a couple of points that I want to highlight, if you don't mind. First of all, the Jews, as I said, in the 17th, 18th century, was very religious, just like the European. They, in the Jordan savannah, they lived there were two bodies. On the religious side, there was the rabbinical body that was controlling all the rabbinical expert, the Jewish way of life. And because they were like independent state, and they were not under the British and the Dutch law, they had their own askamot, what they called, which is the agreements that the community, the Jews had to live according to these askamot. That was the rules of the country. Because of the slaves, that was before Industrial Revolution. Slavery was everywhere, you know, in North America, in South America, etc. We can't escape it. But the Jews, at least, were following the rules of the Torah because they had to follow, that's what the rabbi said. So, for example, the Jews, the slaves in the Jewish plantations were not allowed to work on Shabbat. That infuriated the Dutch governor and the Protestants that ran the rest of the plantation, because they say, you are giving a very bad example. We on Sunday don't work, but the slave have to work. And the Jews refused all those years. After so many years in the Torah, it says you have to release the slaves. So slaves were released by the Jews, not by the others. In the others, they lived until they died. Third of all, the Jews, those who wanted to become members of the community were always welcome. So 7% of the Jewish community at that time were blacks, slaves, and mulattoes. And later on, they had in Paramaribo their own synagogue. There was the third synagogue called Darkei Yesharim, righteous of the people, the way of righteous. And that was a black and mulatto synagogue. And they were under the supervision of the rabbinical authority of the Jewish savannah. Now, I'll give you an example of the relationship between the slaves and the Jews. The escaped slaves, the Maroons, they started a rebellion and they attacked the plantations everywhere. In the beginning of their rebellion, they attacked 2 Jewish plantations and they killed the owners of the plantations. Immediately, the chiefs of the Maroon villages in the jungle came to the Jordan savannah and said, we have nothing against you Jews. You treated us well. So we want to sign a peace treaty with you that you will feel safe. And from that moment, all those years, all those 150 years, there was no attacks on Jewish plantations. It was only in 2 districts, Para and Saramaka, where no Jewish plantations were there. Furthermore, the Jewish army was volunteers army. That's the only army that the American Indians and slaves volunteered to serve in the Jewish army. Nobody, you don't trust. If you treat bad the slaves, you don't allow them to come because you don't trust them.
Yes.
But some of them wanted to become soldiers in the Jewish army to protect the territory. So the American Indians and the Africans were part of the Jewish army. So all in all, I can say that, was there any abuse of blacks? Yes, there were. Sure, I wasn't there, but I'm sure there is. But it was immediately controlled by authorities. And all in all, if you look at the overall picture, the Jews treated them far much better than the others. And I want to finish one comment. In 1808, slave trade became illegal in Suriname. And by the way, there was no one Jews that involved in the slave trade in Suriname. It was very lucrative business, but none of the Jews were involved in that. That's according to Mordechai Arbel, an historian that he went through the archives in The Hague in Holland, the National Archive of the Netherlands, through all the names of the slave merchants, and none of the Jews were there. In 1830, slave trade was seized in Suriname. And in 1863, it was abolished. And that was 2 years before the American abolished there. But that was already in 60 years or 55 years before they already stopped the slave trade and everything. So Suriname was much more liberal on that point of view, and the Jews were the most liberal of all. That's why even today, the blacks love the Jews. They have no hatred or bad feeling, and we still have. You saw in the pictures in the Rosh Hashanah, there are blacks there carrying the Torah. They are part of the community. There's no discrimination. Everyone is welcome.
Thank you, Jacob. And I'm so glad that today you mentioned 2 of our supporting members. You mentioned Bet Rain and you mentioned Kulani. And they are 2 of our 7 supporting members. And we are very proud to have them supporting this series. So
thank you.
Thank you, Jacob, for your informative and heartfelt presentation. Okay, we truly, I have to start by admitting that I never knew there were any Jews in Suriname until I met you. Okay, and you mentioned them. Thank you for introducing us to them and for sharing their history. You've given us today an overview of European Jewish history, prior to, during, and after World War II. Your slides have brought to life this remote Jewish community, and you have brought to our attention the extreme needs of this community and how important it is for all of us to support communities like this. We admire and recommend you for all you have achieved and commend you for all your hard work and preserving and on behalf or working, persevering on behalf of this little known Jewish community. It has been such a pleasure listening to you today and having you as our speaker this evening, because you have taught us so much about this valiant community. Before we say good night, I would like to announce that our next webinar in the Sephardic Mizrahi series is scheduled for the morning of Sunday, May 23rd at 11 a.m. Our speaker will be Cheryl Tucker, who will be connecting with us from Mumbai, India. She will be speaking on the Jews of Goa and will cover the Portuguese Inquisition acting in Goa, which is interesting. I knew that they did affect the Cochin community in Goa, but I never knew there were Jews in the Cochin community in South India, but I never knew that there was any Jew in Goa. So this would be very, very interesting to listen to. And just in case you're wondering where Goa is, it is 604 kilometers south of Bombay by road, but way north of Cochin. Cochin is even further south. Cheryl has done extensive research on this topic and has presented on this subject in many different locations around the world, including the international conference held in Lisbon in 2018. So we are very happy and proud to have her as one of our speakers next month. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We look forward to seeing you all on May 23rd. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.